We're pleased to welcome Ken Venturi to the Suncoast Morning Magazine. Thanks for getting up early to be with us today, Ken.
Good morning, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I read your book over the weekend. I just want to tell the listeners, even if you've never played golf or have any interest in sports, it really is an inspiring book by the stories you tell of overcoming some pretty difficult times in your life. Was it a difficult process for you to write it at all?
Well, a lot of my friends who have known me were amazed at some things because I've been a very private person, and of course you can see that from the time I was a young man. I had that speech problem. I was a bad stammerer. Couldn't even hardly say my name when I was 13 years old, which made me a loner, and that's where I kind of got where I traveled alone, did everything alone because it was easy. It was a lot easier than trying to embarrass myself by speaking.
Yeah, you talk a lot about that, overcoming the problem as someone who's had, not quite to your extent, but a little speech problem as a kid. I can relate to that. And you chose golf primarily. It was a sport you could do in solitude and just practice for hours and hours on the range, wasn't it?
Well, I'd go out there, and I picked up the clubs just to find the loneliest sport I could. And the things I taught myself, it's odd that I'm on the Stuttering Foundation and the board, and things that I did of teaching young kids to speak, they couldn't understand how I figured it out, but it was just something that I did, and then swinging the golf club gave me the rhythm, and so there's been quite a few people who have had stammering problems.
Yeah, I know you talk about Mel Tillis, the famous country singer who's also from this area of Florida originally, and it is interesting, music, when he sings, he has no troubles, with the stuttering or stammering, like you said, and I guess it has something to do with rhythm in some way, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely does. In fact, you'll find a lot of stammering people that talk a lot, they'll use their hands, and you get the rhythm and going like that, and of course, you've got Winston Churchill, you've got Marilyn Monroe, you've got quite a few people that have stammered, but I guess when you get into that rhythm, it's like Mel Tillis does it when you're singing. I don't know of many stammerers that stammer when they're singing.
Right. It is amazing. That must be different parts of the brain, I guess, that affect it. But obviously, you've done a tremendous job overcoming it and made it in the broadcast business for so long. So that is quite a thing. Do you still have to do things to try and keep your mind off it, or how did it ever affect you in the booth at all?
Well, I get pretty much concentrated in the one thing, Doug, that really helped me a lot is that the earphones, because you can hear yourself talking, and that's a feedback, and it kind of helps you there.
Mm-hmm.
You hear your voice, and that really helps.
It really does. Yeah, I found that myself. The theme of the book, I guess you have to say, getting up and down my 60 years in golf, in a few words, is basically don't give up and keep trying. And I was just amazed, like you said, you have been quite a private person. And it doesn't have to be self-serving, but in high school, I actually did a book report on a story that Frank Gifford wrote in one of his books on courage about your incredible win at the U.S. Open in '64. And really, some of the stories in there I did not realize you went through, and it is quite an inspirational story. So have you gotten any feedback from the people around the country that were surprised at it?
Oh, I've gotten tremendous feedback, Doug. I've gotten great response to it. The book review got a 4.5 star, and I've gotten just all positive, good feedbacks to it.
Yeah, it's a great read, and like I said, you really don't even have to be a golf fan to enjoy it. I know you have lived in this area and a little bit south of us in the Naples area for quite a few years before moving back to California. You had a golf school down here too, don't you?
I had one in Orlando there, and I had some up there, and I lived on Marco Island. I lived on Marco about 27 years before moving back to California now, because this is where my family is, my kids and grandkids are, and where I was born and raised, so it's kind of like coming back home again, which I'm glad I did. I enjoyed my life down on Marco, but it's a lot different here, which I'm enjoying it very, very much.
Yeah, from the San Francisco area originally, and you tell some great stories in the book about Joe DiMaggio, who was a close friend of yours, also from that area as well. And talk a little about Joe DiMaggio, first of all.
Joe was a very private person. I gave Joe his first lesson. In fact, when I was a young man, Joe was my hero, of course, and I used to shag fly balls for him, and I was signed to a contract to the Yankees by Lefty O'Doul when I was 18
Really?
years old, but I realized those dugouts weren't near as good as those clubhouses, so I decided golf would be my place to go.
And that is nice, a 19th hole in the dugout, I guess. Yeah. And then I was really surprised at the great stories you tell about the chairman of the board himself, Frank Sinatra. You had a close friendship with him as well. Maybe just a couple of words on him.
Well, we were close at here. I met Frank Sinatra probably was around 1950 or 52 in Palm Springs, and then when I moved here, we were bachelors together for about 3-4 years together, and he's one of the persons that when someone says something wrong about somebody, it said, well, there's a good chance that you've never met him. He was probably the most giving, kindest person you ever want to know. He would look in the papers and find people who are destitute or people who needed help or children needed operations, and he'd be the first one to volunteer, but they could never tell where the money came from.
Our guest is Ken Venturi. The name of the book is Getting Up and Down, My 60 Years in Golf. It's published by Triumph Books, and you can get it by going to Amazon.com. I'm sure most of the bookstores around the country have it, or Amazon.com. So it is a tremendous book, and it was an easy read. I mean, it tells some great stories, and the co-author was Mike Arkish, is that right?
Michael Arkish,
Mike
yes.
Arkish did a great job telling, putting down your stories into words. Just got a couple more minutes. I'd like to get your thoughts. This week, of course, the tour moves to the Byron Nelson Classic, and you tell some great stories about his influence on your life. Just talk a couple of minutes about Byron Nelson.
Well, in fact, I just talked to Byron yesterday. He called me, and he has his tournament is this week, and he's having a little problem with vertigo, he said, but I remember Byron when I was a young man. I was probably 14 years old. I saw him win the San Francisco Open at Olympic Club, and I came home and I never known I'd get to know him, and told my mother I saw the greatest golfer of all time, and I want to grow up to be just like him. And in 1952 in Seattle, after the National Amateur, Byron Nelson said, how would you like to work with me? And he took me under his wing, and Byron to me has been probably like a second father to me. But I've always said one thing: you can say or debate who's the greatest golfer that ever was, but I would have to say that Byron Nelson is probably the finest gentleman that I've ever met.
I just want to ask you one thing. Locally on the Channel 16 down here, the PBS station, they show Ed Sullivan shows on the Saturday nights, and about a week or two ago they had a clip of you on there giving a golf tip. What was that like, being on the Ed Sullivan show?
Ed Sullivan, we had I got on there after I won the Open, and I was on his show a couple times, and after I won the Open, we had a nice deal to go and talk back and forth, and when I looked down, the teleprompter broke, and Ed Sullivan was not a very good ad-libber, and he just said, well, nice having you on, and I got off the show in about 30 seconds.
Yeah. You said you had to rehearse for an hour, and then once the prompter blew, that was the end of the bid, huh?
He couldn't ad-lib very well.
Yeah, this one they showed was, I think, a later appearance where he had you come out, and I think you showed a tip on how to swing the 5-iron to hold the club. So you got a few more minutes on that. But, yeah, that was quite a show. He did that a lot with sports people. If you happen to win a golf tournament or, a baseball game that afternoon, he actually gave a chance to take a bow, and that really helped a lot of those athletes, I guess, get some more notoriety.
Oh, he was great. We used to play in pro-ams together up around Westchester, and he became a very good friend of mine.
Great entertainer, probably the best variety show in television, was on for about 23 years. Well, the name of the book is Getting Up and Down, My 60 Years in Golf. It's published by Triumph Books, and you can get it at any bookstore or Amazon.com. It's a tremendous read. Ken Venturi, it's been a pleasure to spend a few minutes with you. I've enjoyed your work on CBS. We miss you. I know Lanny Watkins does a great job, but we miss you on the television every week.
Well, thank you, Doug. I think after 35 years, I think it was time to say goodbye, and I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate you calling and enjoyed talking with you.